The elevator doors closed with a soft ding, sealing my fate. In my hands, a cardboard box containing 5 years of my professional life, family photos, a small succulent plant, and the Arabic dictionary my grandmother had given me when I first started working at Peterson Global Technologies. What I didn't know was that in exactly 21 days, those same elevator doors would open to reveal my former CEO desperately trying to salvage the biggest business deal in the company's history. A deal that would have been mine to close. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Layla Hassan, and I'm a third-generation Lebanese American who grew up speaking Arabic as fluently as English in our household in Dearborn, Michigan. After graduating from Northwestern with a degree in international business and a minor in Middle Eastern studies, I joined Peterson Global Technologies as a junior account manager. The company specialized in telecommunications infrastructure, and I quickly discovered I had a natural talent for building relationships with international clients. Peterson Global was headquartered in a gleaming 40-story tower in downtown Chicago, where the floors were divided by department sales on floors 12 through 16, executive suites on the top 3 floors, and international relations occupying the prestigious 28th floor. That's where I eventually found myself after 3 rapid promotions, working directly under Regional Director Marcus Thompson, who had become something of a mentor to me. The company had been making aggressive pushes into emerging markets, particularly in Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe, but the Middle East remained largely untapped territory. This wasn't due to lack of opportunity. Quite the opposite. The region was experiencing unprecedented growth in telecommunications infrastructure, with governments and private companies investing billions in modernizing their networks. The challenge was cultural and linguistic barriers that most American companies struggled to navigate. That's where I came in. My Arabic wasn't just conversational, it was business fluent, complete with the formal registers and cultural nuances that made the difference between closing a deal and watching it walk away. I understood the importance of personal relationships in Middle Eastern business culture, the significance of proper greetings and protocols, and the subtle art of negotiation that required patience and respect, rather than the aggressive tactics that often worked in Western markets. My first major breakthrough came with a telecommunications company in Jordan. The initial contact had been made through a third-party consultant who spoke broken English and seemed frustrated by the communication barrier. When I took over the account and began corresponding in Arabic, everything changed. Not only did we close the deal, but the client specifically requested that I handle all future communications and began referring us to other companies in the region. Within 18 months, I had developed a portfolio of Middle Eastern clients that represented nearly 30% of our international revenue. Companies in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait were not only purchasing our standard telecommunications packages, but were also requesting customized solutions that commanded premium prices. The relationship-building aspect of Middle Eastern business culture, which many Western companies found time-consuming and efficient, actually worked in our favor because it created long-term partnerships rather than one-off transactions. Marcus Thompson recognized my value to the company immediately. He regularly praised my work in department meetings, often pointing out how my cultural insights had prevented potential misunderstandings that could have derailed negotiations. He also made sure I received appropriate recognition during quarterly reviews, which led to salary increases and expanded responsibilities. However, not everyone at Peterson Global appreciated my contribution. There was an undercurrent of tension that I initially attributed to the usual office politics that plague most large corporations. Some colleagues would make offhand comments about my special treatment, or suggest that my success was due to unfair advantages rather than skill and hard work. The comments were subtle enough to be dismissed as jealousy, but persistent enough to create an uncomfortable atmosphere. The real problems began when James Peterson III was promoted to CEO following his father's retirement. James III, or Trip as he preferred to be called, was a Harvard MBA who had spent most of his career in domestic markets. He was 38 years old, had never worked anywhere except Peterson Global, and had strong opinions about how the company should operate. His vision focused heavily on automation, cost-cutting, and what he called streamlining operations. Tripp's first major initiative was to restructure the international division. He believed that the company was spending too much money on specialized personnel and that most international business could be handled through standardized processes and translation software. During his first all-hands meeting, he outlined his plan to reduce the international staff by 40% while maintaining the same level of client service through innovative technological solutions. The writing was on the wall, but I didn't realize how clearly it spelled out my fate. Tripp scheduled individual meetings with all international division employees to discuss their roles in the new structure. When my turn came, I walked into his corner office on the 39th floor with a portfolio of my recent achievements and a presentation about growth opportunities in the Middle Eastern market. Tripp barely glanced at my material. He was focused on his laptop screen, occasionally typing while I spoke. When I finished my presentation about a potential partnership with a major Saudi telecommunications conglomerate that could be worth upwards of $700 million over 5 years, he looked up with an expression that I'll never forget. "Layla," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I think you're overcomplicating things. We have Google Translate now, we have AI chatbots that can handle multiple languages. We don't need to pay someone a 6-figure salary just to speak Arabic." I was stunned. I tried to explain that successful international business relationships, particularly in the Middle East, required much more than translation software. I talked about cultural nuances, the importance of personal relationships, and the fact that many of our clients specifically requested to work with me because they trusted our communication. Tripp waved his hand dismissively. "Look, I'm sure you're very good at what you do, but the world is changing. Our clients need to adapt to modern business practices, and we need to operate more efficiently. If they can't conduct business in English using standard protocols, then maybe they're not the right clients for us." I felt my stomach drop. I had seen this attitude before, the arrogant assumption that American business practices were universal and that other cultures should simply adapt rather than be accommodated. It was the kind of thinking that had cost countless companies billions of dollars and lost opportunities. "With respect, Mr. Peterson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "the Middle Eastern market represents our fastest-growing revenue stream. These clients aren't refusing to adapt, they're choosing to work with companies that understand their needs and show them appropriate respect. If we lose these relationships, we'll be handing our competitors a significant advantage." Tripp's expression hardened. "Are you questioning my judgment?" "I'm providing information about market conditions and client expectations based on 5 years of direct experience. What you're providing is resistance to necessary changes. The decision has been made. We're restructuring the international division to operate more efficiently, and your position is being eliminated." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had expected potential changes, maybe a reassignment or reduced responsibilities, but not complete termination. "You're firing me. We're eliminating redundancies. Your last day will be Friday. HR will handle the details of your severance package." I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. 5 years of building relationships, generating millions in revenue, and earning recognition for my contributions, and it was being dismissed as a redundancy. "What about the Saudi deal?" I asked. "The preliminary negotiations are scheduled for next month." Tripp shrugged. "We'll handle it through our standard channels. If they're serious about doing business with us, they'll adapt to our processes." That Friday, I cleaned out my desk while my colleagues watched with a mixture of sympathy and relief that it wasn't them. Marcus Thompson was visibly upset about the decision, but he was powerless to change it. He did, however, provide me with an excellent reference letter and promised to recommend me to contacts at competing firms. As I packed my personal belongings, I couldn't help but think about the relationships I had built over the past 5 years. The clients who had trusted me with their business, who had invited me to their offices and shared meals with me, who had specifically requested my involvement in their project. How would Peterson Global maintain those relationships without anyone who spoke their language or understood their culture? The elevator ride down to the lobby felt interminable. I had entered that building 5 years earlier as an ambitious young professional, excited about building a career in international business. I was leaving as a casualty of corporate cost-cutting and cultural ignorance. What I didn't know was that my departure would trigger a chain of events that would cost Peterson Global far more than my annual salary. The clients I had cultivated weren't just names in a database, they were business partners who had developed personal relationships with me, and, by extension, with the company I represent. When they discovered that I was no longer with Peterson Global, their reactions would be swift and decisive. The Saudi telecommunication deal that Tripp had dismissed so casually was already in advanced stages of negotiation. The client, Al Rashid Communications, was a family-owned conglomerate with operations throughout the Gulf region. They had been working with me for 8 months to develop a comprehensive infrastructure modernization plan that would have been Peterson Global's largest single contract. But Abdullah Al Rashid, the company's CEO, had made it clear from the beginning that he valued personal relationships above all else. He had specifically requested that I be the primary point of contact for all negotiations, and he had traveled to Chicago twice to meet with me in person. The deal wasn't just about telecommunication equipment, it was about trust, mutual respect, and long-term partnership. As I walked out of the Peterson Global building for the last time, I wondered how Tripp planned to explain my sudden absence to clients who had grown accustomed to working with me. I wondered if he had bothered to research the cultural implications of his decision, or if he simply assumed that business was business regardless of context. The answer to those questions would come sooner than I expected, and the consequences would be far more severe than even I had anticipated. But at that moment, standing on the sidewalk outside the building where I had spent 5 years building my career, all I could think about was starting over and proving that my skills and knowledge were valuable, even if Peterson Global didn't recognize their worth. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The irony wasn't lost on me that Tripp's cost-cutting measure would end up costing his company exponentially more than it saved. Sometimes the most expensive decision a company can make is the one that seems like the most obvious way to save money. The weekend after my termination passed in a blur of mixed emotions. Saturday morning, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at my laptop screen and updating my LinkedIn profile. The phrase "open to new opportunities" felt both liberating and terrifying. By Sunday evening, I had already received 3 messages from recruiters and 2 calls from former colleagues who had heard about my departure through the corporate grapevine. Marcus Thompson called me Monday morning, his voice heavy with frustration. "Layla, I need you to know that I fought hard against this decision. I presented Tripp with your revenue numbers, your client satisfaction ratings, everything. He wouldn't budge. He's convinced that technological solutions can replace human expertise. I appreciate you trying, Marcus. Really, I do. There's something else," he continued. "I've been fielding calls from your clients since Friday afternoon. Word travels fast in the Middle Eastern business community. They're not happy about your departure, and some of them are demanding explanations." My heart sank. I had hoped that the transition might be smoother, that perhaps the clients would give Peterson Global a chance to prove that they could maintain the same level of service. "What kind of calls?" Abdullah Al Rashid, from Al Rashid Communications, called me personally. He was very polite, but very direct. He wanted to know why his primary contact had been terminated without any prior discussion or notification. I had to explain that it was a corporate restructuring decision, but he didn't seem satisfied with that explanation. Abdullah Al Rashid was exactly the kind of client that Tripp didn't understand. He was a third-generation businessman who had built his telecommunications empire on the foundation of personal relationships and mutual respect. His grandfather had started the company with a small radio repair shop in Riyadh, and Abdullah had expanded it into a regional powerhouse while maintaining the traditional values that emphasize trust and long-term partnerships. "What did you tell him about the upcoming negotiation?" I assured him that Peterson Global remained committed to the project, and that we would assign our best people to ensure a smooth transition. He listened politely, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. He asked specifically about who would be replacing you and what their experience was with Middle Eastern markets. That was the question I had been dreading. Tripp's cost-cutting measures hadn't included hiring replacement personnel with relevant expertise. The plan was to distribute my responsibilities among existing staff members who had no background in Middle Eastern business culture and no Arabic language skills. Who is he assigning to the account? Jennifer Walsh from the Domestic Commercial Division. She's competent, but she's never worked on an international deal, much less one involving Middle Eastern clients. Tripp thinks her MBA from Wharton and her success with Fortune 500 companies will translate directly to international markets. I knew Jennifer Walsh. She was intelligent, hard-working, and completely unprepared for the cultural complexities of doing business in the Middle East. Her approach to negotiations was aggressive and direct, which worked well with American clients who appreciated efficiency and straightforward communication. However, Middle Eastern business culture valued relationship building, patience, and indirect communication styles that could easily be misinterpreted as inefficiency by someone unfamiliar with the cultural context. Marcus Abdullah specifically requested that all communication be conducted in Arabic for the technical specifications. Jennifer doesn't speak Arabic, and Google Translate isn't going to be sufficient for complex telecommunications terminology. I know. I raised that concern with Tripp. He said we'd use professional translation services when necessary, but that most of the communication could be handled in English, since it's the international language of business. The naivety of that statement was staggering. While English was indeed widely used in international business, assuming that all clients would be comfortable conducting complex negotiations in their second language was a fundamental misunderstanding of how relationship-based cultures operate. For Abdullah and many other Middle Eastern business leaders, the language of negotiation wasn't just about communication, it was about respect, trust, and demonstrating that the other party valued the relationship enough to meet them half. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected phone call from Sarah Chen, a former colleague who had left Peterson Global 6 months earlier to join Meridian Technologies, one of our primary competitors. Sarah had been part of the international division and had witnessed firsthand the value of my work with Middle Eastern clients. Layla, I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. Tripp is making a huge mistake. Thanks, Sarah. I'm still processing it all. To be honest, that's actually why I'm calling. Meridian has been trying to break into the Middle Eastern market for 2 years without much success. We have the technology and the resources, but we've been struggling with the cultural barrier. When I heard about your situation, I immediately spoke with our VP of International Development. We'd like to offer you a position as Director of Middle Eastern Operations. The offer was tempting, a significant salary increase, equity options, and the opportunity to build a Middle Eastern division from the ground up. More importantly, it would allow me to continue working with the clients and markets I had come to love. I'm interested, but I need to be careful about non-compete clauses and client confidentiality agreements. We've already had our legal team review the standard Peterson Global employment contract. The non-compete clause is limited to domestic markets and doesn't apply to international business development. As for client confidentiality, we wouldn't expect you to share any proprietary information. We're more interested in your cultural expertise and language skill. That afternoon, I met with Meridian's leadership team at their headquarters in downtown Dallas. The company was smaller than Peterson Global, but more agile, with a reputation for innovation and customer service. Their approach to international expansion was methodical and respectful, emphasizing cultural understanding and long-term relationship building rather than aggressive market penetration. During the interview process, I was impressed by their genuine interest in understanding Middle Eastern business culture. They asked intelligent questions about communication styles, negotiation techniques, and relationship-building strategy. It was clear that they recognized the value of cultural expertise rather than viewing it as an unnecessary expense. Meanwhile, back at Peterson Global, the transition was not going as smoothly as Tripp had anticipated. Jennifer Walsh was struggling with the cultural aspects of the Al Rashid Communications account. Her first conference call with Abdullah's team had been a disaster, according to Marcus, who called me Wednesday evening to vent his frustration. She opened the call by jumping straight into technical specifications, without any of the usual pleasantries. In Middle Eastern business culture, that's considered extremely rude. Then she became impatient when Abdullah's team wanted to discuss the broader context of the project rather than focusing on specific deliverables. What was their reaction? They were polite, but I could tell they were offended. After the call, Abdullah's assistant called me privately to express concerns about the change in communication style. She said that Mr. Al-Rashid was questioning whether Peterson Global was still committed to the partnership. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Abdullah Al-Rashid was not just any client. He was an influential figure in the Middle Eastern telecommunications industry with extensive connections throughout the region. His opinion of Peterson Global would influence other potential clients and could either open doors or close them permanently. Did Jennifer prepare for the call? Did she research Middle Eastern business protocols? Tripp told her not to worry about cultural differences. He said that business is business, and that clients would adapt to our process. He actually discouraged her from spending time on what he called cultural sensitivity training. The short-sightedness of that approach was breathtaking. Tripp was essentially sabotaging his own company's relationships in the name of efficiency. He was treating international business like a domestic transaction, ignoring the fact that different cultures had different expectations and communication styles. Thursday morning, I accepted Meridian's offer. The decision was easier than I had expected, partly because of the opportunity it represented, but mostly because I had lost confidence in Peterson Global's leadership. Tripp's approach to international business was fundamentally flawed, and I didn't want to be associated with the inevitable failures that would result from his decisions. As I signed the employment contract, I couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. Peterson Global had terminated my position to save money, but they were about to lose far more than my annual salary due to their inability to maintain the relationships I had built. That afternoon, I received a surprising phone call from Abdullah Al-Rashid himself. His English was excellent, though he typically preferred to conduct business in Arabic as a matter of principle and cultural pride. Ms. Hassan, I hope you don't mind me calling you directly. I obtained your personal number from a mutual contact in the industry. Of course not, Mr. Al-Rashid. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. I wanted to express my disappointment about your departure from Peterson Global. Our company has enjoyed an excellent working relationship with you over the past months, and we were looking forward to completing our current negotiation. I appreciate your kind words. I'm sorry that the transition has been disruptive. I'm confident that Peterson Global will assign qualified personnel to ensure the project's success. There was a long pause. Ms. Hassan, I must be frank with you. Yesterday's conference call was very concerning. The new representative seemed unfamiliar with our business practices and appeared impatient with our communication style. She also seemed unaware of the technical specifications we had discussed with you in previous meetings. My heart sank. The situation was even worse than I had imagined. I'm sorry to hear that. Perhaps there was a miscommunication during the transition. Perhaps. However, I wanted to inform you that Al-Rashid Communications is reconsidering our partnership with Peterson Global. We value personal relationships and cultural understanding in our business dealing. If Peterson Global is no longer committed to maintaining these standards, we may need to explore other options. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, during which Abdullah made it clear that he was not just disappointed. He was actively looking for alternatives. He asked about my future plans and whether I would be continuing to work in the telecommunications industry. I explained that I would be joining Meridian Technologies in a role focused on Middle Eastern markets. Meridian Technologies, he repeated thoughtfully. I am not familiar with this company, but I would be interested in learning more about their services and approach to international partnerships. After we ended the call, I sat in my car for several minutes, processing the implications of the conversation. Peterson Global was about to lose not just a $700 million deal, but potentially their entire Middle Eastern market presence. Abdullah Al-Rashid's influence in the industry was substantial, and his opinion would carry weight with other potential clients throughout the region. That evening, I called Marcus to inform him about my new position at Meridian Technologies. I also felt obligated to warn him about Abdullah's concerns, though I was careful not to breach any confidentiality agreements. Marcus, I received a call from Abdullah Al-Rashid today. He's very unhappy with the transition and is actively considering terminating the partnership. I was afraid of that, Jennifer's second call with his team yesterday was even worse than the first. She tried to rush through the technical specifications without addressing their concerns about implementation timelines. They asked for a 2-week delay to review the proposals, and she told them that delays would impact pricing. She threatened to increase prices because they wanted time to review the proposals. Essentially, yes. She said that extended negotiation periods would require additional administrative costs. In Middle Eastern business culture, that's insult. It suggests that you don't value the relationship enough to invest time in proper discussions. The situation was spiraling out of control. Tripp's efficiency-focused approach was systematically destroying relationships that had taken years to build. His assumption that clients would adapt to Peterson Global's processes was proving disastrously wrong. Marcus, I need to tell you something. I've accepted a position with Meridian Technologies. I start Monday. I'm happy for you, Layla. You deserve to work for a company that appreciates your talents. I just wish Peterson Global had been smarter about this whole situation. What's Tripp's reaction to the problems with the Al Rashid account? He's blaming Jennifer for not following established protocols, but he's also insisting that the clients are being unreasonable. He seems to think that if we just push harder and emphasize the quality of our technology, they'll come around. That approach was guaranteed to fail. Middle Eastern business culture valued patience, relationship building, and mutual respect. Pushing harder would only convince Abdullah that Peterson Global was not a suitable long-term partner. As I prepared for my first day at Meridian Technologies, I reflected on the events of the past week. In less than 7 days I had been fired, offered a new position, and watched my former employer begin to lose one of the most valuable clients in their portfolio. The irony was almost comical. Tripp's cost-cutting measure was about to cost his company exponentially more than it saved. But the real tragedy was that none of this was necessary. Peterson Global had built a strong reputation in the Middle Eastern market, through years of careful relationship building and cultural sensitivity. Tripp's short-sighted decisions were destroying that reputation in a matter of days, and the consequences would extend far beyond a single lost deal. The telecommunication industry in the Middle East was tightly interconnected, with business leaders maintaining close relationships across borders and companies. Abdullah al-Rashid's negative experience with Peterson Global would spread quickly through his network, potentially closing doors that had taken years to open. As I prepared for my new role at Meridian Technologies, I couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for Tripp to realize the full cost of his decision. The $700 million al-Rashid deal was just the beginning. The real damage would be measured in lost opportunities, damaged relationships, and the years it would take to rebuild trust in a market that Peterson Global had taken for granted. My first day at Meridian Technologies began with a comprehensive briefing about the company's international expansion strategy. The Dallas headquarters occupied a modern glass building in the Legacy West District, and the atmosphere was noticeably different from Peterson Global's formal corporate environment. The dress code was business casual, meetings were collaborative rather than hierarchical, and there was a genuine sense of excitement about growth opportunities. David Rodriguez, the VP of International Development, walked me through Meridian's previous attempts to enter Middle Eastern market. They had made contact with several potential clients over the past 18 months, but negotiations had stalled due to communication barriers and cultural misunderstanding. The company had excellent technology and competitive pricing, but they lacked the cultural bridge that could transform initial interest into actual partnerships. We've learned from our mistakes, David explained as we reviewed their previous proposal. We tried to apply our domestic sales strategies to international markets, and it didn't work. We need someone who understands not just the language, but the entire business ecosystem. The timing of my arrival at Meridian couldn't have been more fortuitous. Within my first week, I had identified several opportunities that the company's previous international efforts had missed. The key was understanding that Middle Eastern business culture operated on different timelines and priorities than American companies typically expect. During my second week, I began reaching out to contacts in my professional network. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Many of the business leaders I had worked with were surprised to learn that I was no longer with Peterson Global, and several expressed immediate interest in learning about Meridian's capability. One of the most promising conversations was with Fatima Al-Zahra, the Chief Technology Officer at Emirates Future Networks in Dubai. Fatima and I had developed a strong professional relationship during my time at Peterson Global, and she had been interested in expanding her company's American partnership. When I explained that I was now with Meridian Technologies, she immediately requested a comprehensive presentation about our services. "Layla, I am very interested in what Meridian can offer," she said during our video call. "Your former company sent us some proposals last year, but the communication was challenging. The representatives seemed to misunderstand our requirements and were impatient with our decision-making process." This was exactly the kind of feedback that validated my concerns about TRIP's approach to international business. American companies often viewed the deliberative decision-making process common in Middle Eastern business culture as inefficiency, when in fact, it was a careful evaluation system designed to ensure long-term success. "What specific areas would be most valuable for Emirates' future network?" I asked. "We are planning a major infrastructure upgrade across our entire network. The project involves fiber optic installation, wireless tower modernization, and integration of 5G technology. The total investment will be approximately $400 million over 3 years. The scope of the project was massive, potentially even larger than the Al Rashid deal that Peterson Global was struggling to maintain. More importantly, Fatima's company had extensive connections throughout the Gulf region, and a successful partnership could open doors to additional opportunity. Meanwhile, the situation at Peterson Global continued to deteriorate. Marcus Thompson called me during my 3rd week at Meridian, with increasingly disturbing updates about the Al Rashid negotiations. Abdullah requested another conference call to discuss the project timeline. Marcus reported, Jennifer interpreted this as a stalling tactic and suggested that perhaps Al Rashid Communications wasn't serious about moving forward. She actually questioned their commitment to the partnership. The audacity of that statement was staggering. Abdullah Al Rashid was one of the most respected business leaders in the Middle East, with a track record of successful partnerships spanning decades. Questioning his commitment was not just unprofessional, it was deeply insulting. How did Abdullah respond? He was very quiet during the rest of the call. Afterward, his assistant contacted me to schedule a meeting with Trip directly. Abdullah wants to discuss the partnership at the executive level. This was a clear escalation, and not in a positive direction. When Middle Eastern business leaders requested meetings with senior executives, it typically meant that the working relationship had broken down and they were giving the company one final opportunity to salvage the partnership. When is the meeting scheduled? Next week. Trip is flying to Riyadh on Thursday. I felt a mixture of concern and morbid curiosity about how that meeting would unfold. Trip's cultural insensitivity and impatience would be magnified in a face-to-face meeting with Abdullah, whose communication style emphasized courtesy, relationship building, and careful consideration of all aspects of a business partnership. That same week, I received an unexpected call from Ahmed Khalil, the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Qatar National Communications. Ahmed had been one of my most successful client relationships at Peterson Global, and his company had been considering a major expansion of their American partnerships. "Layla, I was very surprised to learn that you are no longer with Peterson Global. May I ask, what happened?" I explained the corporate restructuring in general terms, focusing on the decision to eliminate specialized international positions rather than criticizing specific individuals or policies. "I see. This is very concerning. Peterson Global sent us a new representative last month, and the experience was quite disappointing. The gentleman seemed unfamiliar with our previous discussions and suggested that we restart negotiations from the beginning." This was another example of the systematic destruction of relationships that had taken years to build. Starting over wasn't just inefficient, it was disrespectful to clients who had already invested time and effort in developing partnerships. "What are your thoughts about working with other American companies?" I asked. "We remain interested in American partnerships, but we need to work with companies that understand our business culture and respect our processes. If you are working with a new company, we would be very interested in learning about their approach to international partnerships." By the end of my 3rd week at Meridian, I had identified potential partnerships worth over $1 billion in combined value. The key was leveraging the relationships I had built over years of cultural sensitivity and professional competence. These weren't just business transactions, they were partnerships based on trust and mutual respect. David Rodriguez was amazed by the response to my outreach effort. In 3 weeks, you've generated more qualified leads than our entire international division produced in the past year. What's the secret? There's no secret, I explained. It's about understanding that international business is fundamentally about relationships. American companies often focus exclusively on products and pricing, but Middle Eastern clients want to know that they're partnering with people who understand their needs and respect their culture. The contrast with Peterson Global's approach was stark. While Tripp was focused on cost-cutting and efficiency, Meridian was investing in relationship building and cultural competence. The results spoke for themselves. Within a month, we had serious negotiations underway with 3 major Middle Eastern telecommunications companies. The most advanced discussion was with Fatima Al-Zahra at Emirates Future Networks. After reviewing Meridian's technical specifications and pricing, she was ready to move forward with a preliminary agreement for the first phase of their infrastructure upgrade. The initial contract would be worth $60 million, with additional phases potentially reaching $400 million total. Layla, your company's approach is exactly what we have been looking for, Fatima explained during our negotiation call. You understand our technical requirements, respect our decision-making process, and communicate in a way that builds confidence in the partnership. The irony was not lost on me. Meridian was about to close a deal worth potentially $400 million, while Peterson Global was struggling to maintain a $700 million partnership that should have been a guaranteed success. Thursday arrived, and Tripp flew to Riyadh for his meeting with Abdullah Al-Rashid. Marcus had briefed me on the preparation, which consisted mainly of reviewing technical specifications and pricing information. Tripp had declined suggestions to research Middle Eastern business protocols, insisting that professionalism was universal and that cultural considerations were overrated. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon Riyadh time, which meant Thursday morning in Chicago. I found myself checking my phone throughout the day, wondering how the conversation was unfolding. Based on my knowledge of both personalities involved, I had serious concerns about the outcome. Marcus called me Friday morning with a detailed report. His voice was heavy with frustration and resignation. It was a disaster, Layla, a complete disaster. What happened? Tripp arrived at Abdullah's office and immediately tried to rush through the agenda. He skipped the traditional greetings and relationship-building conversation that Middle Eastern business culture expects. Instead, he launched into a presentation about Peterson Global's technological capabilities and cost advantages. This was exactly the wrong approach. Abdullah Al-Rashid was known for his courteous, methodical communication style. He typically began business meetings with inquiries about family, mutual acquaintances, and general business conditions. This wasn't wasted time, it was relationship maintenance that formed the foundation of successful partnerships. How did Abdullah respond? He was polite, but clearly uncomfortable. When Tripp finished his presentation, Abdullah asked about the communication problems that had developed since your departure. He specifically mentioned the cultural misunderstandings and the impression that Peterson Global was no longer committed to respectful partnership. He dismissed the concerns as minor communication issues that would resolve themselves as the partnership progressed. He actually suggested that Abdullah's team might need to adapt to more efficient business practices. The arrogance of that statement was breathtaking. Tripp was essentially telling one of the most successful business leaders in the Middle East that his company's established practices were inefficient and needed to be changed to accommodate Peterson Global's preferences. Abdullah's reaction was immediate and definitive. He stood up, thanked Tripp for making the journey to Riyadh, and informed him that Al-Rashid Communications would be terminating their partnership with Peterson Global effective immediately. My heart sank, even though I had expected this out. The $700 million deal was officially dead, killed by cultural insensitivity and corporate arrogance. It gets worse, Marcus continued. Abdullah explained that Al-Rashid Communications had been considering Peterson Global for additional projects throughout the region. The total value of potential partnerships was estimated at over $1 billion. All of that is now off the table. The magnitude of the loss was staggering. Tripp's cost-cutting decision to eliminate my position had cost the company not just my annual salary, but potentially over $1 billion in lost revenue. The short-term savings of eliminating one international specialist had resulted in long-term losses that would impact Peterson Global's growth prospects for years. What was Tripp's reaction when Abdullah terminated the partnership? He actually argued that the decision was premature and that the technological advantages of Peterson Global's products should outweigh any communication concerns. He seemed genuinely unable to understand why the partnership was being terminated. This reaction perfectly encapsulated the fundamental misunderstanding that had led to the disaster. Tripp viewed business relationships as purely transactional, assuming that superior products and competitive pricing would automatically result in successful partnerships. He failed to recognize that in relationship-based business cultures, trust and mutual respect were prerequisites for any meaningful collaboration. The termination of the Al Rashid partnership sent shockwaves through Peterson Global's international division. Within days, other Middle Eastern clients began questioning their own relationships with the company. The telecommunications industry in the region was tightly interconnected, and Abdullah al-Rashid's negative experience quickly became known throughout his professional network. By the following week, 2 additional Middle Eastern clients had terminated their partnerships with Peterson Global. The total value of lost business was approaching $1 billion, and the damage to the company's reputation in the region was potentially irreparable. Meanwhile, at Meridian Technologies, word of Peterson Global's troubles was spreading through industry channels. Several companies that had been considering partnerships with Peterson Global began reaching out to Meridian as an alternative. The timing was perfect for our expansion into Middle Eastern markets. We're receiving inquiries from companies we've never contacted, David Rodriguez reported during our weekly strategy meeting. Apparently, Peterson Global's reputation problems are creating opportunities for their competitor. The irony was complete. Tripp's efficiency-focused approach had not only cost Peterson Global over $1 billion in lost business, but it had also strengthened their competitors by driving dissatisfied clients to companies like Meridian that understood the value of cultural competence and relationship building. As I reflected on the events of the past month, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of vindication and sadness. My termination had been based on the assumption that cultural expertise was an unnecessary expense, but the consequences had proven exactly the opposite. The real cost of cultural insensitivity was measured not in salaries and benefits, but in lost opportunities and damaged relationships that would take years to repair. The lesson was clear: in an increasingly interconnected global economy, companies that ignored cultural differences did so at their own peril. The most expensive decision a company could make was the one that seemed like the most obvious way to save money. The news of Peterson Global's spectacular failure in the Middle East reached the telecommunications industry trade publications within a week of the Al Rashid partnership termination. Telecom World Weekly ran a front-page story titled, "Cultural Missteps Cost Peterson Global Nearly $1 billion in Middle East Partnerships," while International Business Communications published an in-depth analysis of how American companies were struggling to adapt to global business practice. The articles didn't mention my name specifically, but industry insiders knew exactly what had happened. The telecommunications world is surprisingly small, and stories of major business failures spread quickly through professional networks. Several colleagues from other companies reached out to express their shock at Peterson Global's handling of the situation. Robert Sterling, a senior partner at Tech Global Consulting, called me directly after reading the Telecom World article. "Layla, I've been following the Peterson Global situation through industry channels. From what I'm hearing, they made some catastrophic decisions regarding their Middle Eastern operation. It's been a challenging situation for everyone involved," I replied diplomatically, careful not to violate any confidentiality agreements, despite no longer being employed by Peterson Global. "I'm calling because my firm has been retained by 3 major telecommunications companies to evaluate American partners for upcoming infrastructure projects. Based on your reputation in the industry, I wanted to discuss whether Meridian Technologies might be interested in participating in the evaluation process." The opportunity was enormous. Tech Global Consulting specialized in facilitating partnerships between American technology companies and international clients. Their endorsement could open doors throughout the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. More importantly, their evaluation process was rigorous and respected, which meant that any partnerships they facilitated would be based on genuine compatibility rather than just competitive pricing. The preliminary evaluations begin next month, with final partner selection expected by year-end. The combined value of the 3 projects is approximately $1.2 billion over 4 years. This represented exactly the kind of systematic market entry that Meridian had been seeking. Rather than pursuing individual deals on an ad hoc basis, we would be participating in a structured evaluation process that could establish long-term partnerships with multiple clients simultaneously. Meanwhile, the fallout at Peterson Global was intensifying. Marcus Thompson called me with increasingly dire updates about the company's attempts to contain the damage from their Middle Eastern disasters. Tripp brought in an external consulting firm to assess our international operations. Marcus reported during our weekly check-in call. The preliminary findings are brutal. They estimate that our reputation damage in the Middle East will take 3 to 5 years to repair, assuming we make significant changes to our approach. What kind of changes are they recommending? Complete restructuring of the international division, hiring of cultural specialists, mandatory training for all staff working on international accounts, and a formal apology campaign to clients who were affected by the recent communication problem. The recommendations were exactly what should have been implemented from the beginning, but the timing made them seem reactive rather than proactive. Companies that had been damaged by Peterson Global's cultural insensitivity would be skeptical of sudden changes that appeared to be driven by financial losses rather than genuine respect for international business practices. How is Tripp responding to the recommendation? He's resistant to most of them. He keeps insisting that the problems were due to individual communication failures rather than systematic issues. He's authorized some cultural training, but he's balking at the cost of hiring specialized international staff. This response was predictably short-sighted. Tripp was still focused on cost control rather than relationship building, which meant that Peterson Global would likely continue struggling in international markets even after implementing superficial changes. The consulting firm's report also revealed the broader scope of Peterson Global's international problems. The Middle Eastern disasters had created a domino effect that was impacting their relationships in other regions. Asian clients were questioning whether Peterson Global was committed to international partnerships, while European companies were reevaluating their long-term agreement. The consultants estimate that the total impact could reach $1.5 billion in lost business over the next 3 years. Marcus continued, "That's assuming we can prevent further deterioration of existing relationships." The magnitude of the damage was staggering. What had started as a cost-cutting measure to save my annual salary had snowballed into a crisis that threatened Peterson Global's entire international business strategy. The company was now spending millions on consultants and remediation efforts that could have been avoided with basic cultural competence and respect for international business practices. At Meridian Technologies, we were experiencing the opposite trajectory. The Tech Global consulting opportunity had opened conversations with potential clients throughout the Middle East and beyond. Our approach of investing in cultural understanding and relationship building was attracting attention from companies that had been burned by other American firms' insensitivity. Hassan Al-Mahmoud, the chief executive of Advanced Communications Solutions in Kuwait, reached out personally after hearing about Meridian through professional network. His company was planning a comprehensive modernization of Kuwait's telecommunication infrastructure, with an estimated budget of $300 million. "Ms. Hassan, I hope you don't mind me contacting you directly. Your reputation in our industry is excellent, and several colleagues have recommended Meridian Technologies as a company that understands international business culture. Thank you for reaching out, Dr. Al-Mahmoud. I'd be happy to discuss how Meridian might support your modernization project. I must be honest with you, We had preliminary discussions with Peterson Global last year, but the experience was disappointing. The representative seemed impatient with our evaluation process and made several comments that suggested they didn't understand our business practice. This was becoming a familiar pattern. Peterson Global's cultural insensitivity was creating opportunities for their competitors throughout the region. Companies that had been considering Peterson Global as a potential partner were now actively seeking alternatives. The conversation with Dr. Al-Mahmoud led to a comprehensive presentation opportunity in Kuwait City. Unlike Peterson Global's rushed efficiency-focused approach, Meridian was willing to invest the time necessary to understand advanced communication solutions, specific needs, and cultural expectations. David Rodriguez approved the trip immediately. This is exactly the kind of opportunity that justifies our investment in cultural competence. Take whatever time you need to build the relationship properly. The contrast with Tripp's approach couldn't have been more stark. While Peterson Global was cutting costs and rushing negotiations, Meridian was investing in relationship building and demonstrating respect for international business practice. My trip to Kuwait was scheduled for the following month, but the preliminary discussions were already yielding valuable insights. Dr. Al-Mahmoud's company wasn't just looking for telecommunications equipment. They were seeking a long-term technology partner that could support Kuwait's transition to a knowledge-based economy. Our vision extends beyond basic infrastructure, Dr. Al-Mahmoud explained during our video conference. We want to position Kuwait as a regional technology hub, which requires partners who understand both technical capabilities and cultural sensitivities. This was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that American companies often missed when focusing solely on immediate transactions. Dr. Al-Mahmoud was planning for decades, not quarters, which required partners who could think beyond short-term profit margins. The week before my Kuwait trip, I received an unexpected call from Jennifer Walsh, the Peterson Global employee who had replaced me on the Al Rashid account. Her voice was tense and frustrated. "Layla, I hope you don't mind me calling. Marcus gave me your number. I wanted to apologize for how everything played out with the Middle Eastern accounts." "There's no need to apologize, Jennifer. You were put in an impossible situation without adequate preparation or support." That's exactly it. Nobody prepared me for how different the communication styles would be. I thought I could apply the same approaches that worked with domestic clients, but it was completely wrong. Jennifer's admission highlighted one of the fundamental problems with Tripp's approach. Cultural competence couldn't be improvised or learned through trial and error in high-stakes negotiations. It required years of study experience and genuine respect for different business practices. What's the current status of the international division? It's chaos. We've lost 3 more major clients in the past 2 weeks, and several others are demanding meetings with senior executives to discuss their concerns. Tripp is scrambling to contain the damage, but clients don't trust us anymore. The situation was even worse than I had realized. Peterson Global's reputation problems were accelerating rather than stabilizing, which suggested that their attempted remediation efforts were inadequate or poorly executed. Are they planning to hire international specialists? There's talk about it, but Tripp is still focused on cost control. He's authorized some cultural training programs, but he's resistant to hiring people with specialized expertise. He keeps saying that good business practices should be universal. This attitude was ensuring Peterson Global's continued struggles in international markets. Tripp's refusal to acknowledge the value of cultural expertise meant that the company would likely repeat the same mistakes with different clients and regions. The conversation with Jennifer reinforced my appreciation for Meridian's approach to international business. David Rodriguez and the senior leadership team recognized that global expansion required investment in cultural competence, not just technological capability. During my final week of preparation for the Kuwait trip, Tech Global Consulting released their preliminary evaluation criteria for the upcoming partnership assessment. The document emphasized cultural competence, relationship building capabilities, and long-term strategic thinking as primary evaluation factors. Cultural sensitivity and international business expertise are non-negotiable requirements, the evaluation criteria state. Companies that demonstrate genuine understanding of regional business practices and communication styles will receive significant preference in the selection process. This was a direct repudiation of Peterson Global's efficiency-focused approach. The consulting firm had clearly learned from recent industry failures and was prioritizing relationship-based partnerships over purely transactional arrangements. Robert Sterling called to discuss Meridian's participation in the evaluation process. Layla, I've been reviewing your company's approach to international business, and I'm impressed by the level of cultural competence you bring to client relationships. That's exactly what our clients are looking for. We believe that successful international partnerships require genuine understanding and respect for different business cultures. That philosophy is going to serve you well in the current market environment. American companies that ignore cultural differences are finding themselves excluded from major opportunities, while companies that invest in cultural competence are seeing unprecedented growth. The irony was complete. Peterson Global's cost-cutting approach had positioned them as a cautionary tale in industry publications, while Meridian's investment in cultural expertise was opening doors to billion-dollar opportunity. As I prepared for my departure to Kuwait, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had occurred in less than 2 months. Peterson Global had gone from market leader to industry pariah, while Meridian had emerged as a preferred partner for companies seeking culturally competent American technology providers. The lesson was clear: in an interconnected global economy, cultural competence wasn't a luxury, it was a business necessity. Companies that understood this principle would thrive, while those that dismissed it would find themselves increasingly isolated from international opportunity. Tripp's decision to fire me had been based on the assumption that technological solutions could replace human expertise. The results had proven exactly the opposite. Technology could facilitate communication, but it couldn't build trust, demonstrate respect, or navigate the complex cultural nuances that formed the foundation of successful international partnerships. The $700 million Al-Rashid deal had been just the beginning. Peterson Global's total losses were approaching $1.5 billion, with additional damage still accumulating as their reputation problems spread throughout international markets. Meanwhile, Meridian was positioning itself to capture much of that displaced business through systematic relationship building and cultural competence. The most expensive decision Peterson Global had ever made was the one that seemed like the most obvious way to save money. Sometimes the true cost of efficiency isn't measured in dollars saved, but in opportunities lost and relationships destroyed. 6 months after my termination from Peterson Global, I stood in the boardroom of Advanced Communications Solutions in Kuwait City, watching Dr. Hassan Al-Mahmoud sign a contract that would establish Meridian Technologies as the primary technology partner for Kuwait's national telecommunications modernization project. The initial phase was worth $300 million, with additional expansions potentially reaching $800 million over the next 5 years. The signing ceremony was conducted in both Arabic and English, with traditional Kuwaiti hospitality including dates, Arabic coffee, and formal presentations from both companies. Dr. Al-Mahmoud's entire executive team was present, along with representatives from Kuwait's Ministry of Communication. The atmosphere was celebratory, professional, and built on months of careful relationship building. Ms. Hassan, Dr. Al-Mahmoud said, as we concluded the formal proceedings, this partnership represents exactly the kind of international collaboration that Kuwait seeks. Your company's respect for our culture and understanding of our business practices gives us confidence in a successful long-term relationship. The contract signing was more than just a business transaction. It was validation of everything I had argued during my final meeting with Tripp Peterson. Cultural competence wasn't an unnecessary expense, it was the foundation of successful international business relationships. Following the Kuwait ceremony, I flew directly to Dubai for meetings with Emirates Future Networks. Fatima El-Zahra had been impressed by Meridian's performance on the initial project phases and was ready to expand our partnership significantly, The comprehensive infrastructure upgrade we had discussed was moving forward, with Meridian selected as the exclusive American technology partner for the entire 4-year project. Your approach has been refreshing, Fatima explained as we reviewed the expanded partnership agreement. Many American companies treat international clients as secondary markets, but Meridian has demonstrated genuine commitment to understanding our needs and respecting our business culture. The Emirates contract would add another $400 million to Meridian's Middle Eastern portfolio, bringing our total confirmed business in the region to over $700 million. More importantly, both Dr. El Mahmoud and Fatima had extensive networks throughout the Gulf states, and their endorsements were opening doors to additional opportunities throughout the region. During my flight back to Dallas, I received a call from David Rodriguez with extraordinary news. Tech Global Consulting had completed their preliminary evaluations, and Meridian Technologies had been selected as the preferred partner for all 3 major projects they were facilitating. The combined value was $1.2 billion over 4 years, representing the largest international expansion in Meridian's corporate history. Layla, the evaluation committee was unanimous. David reported, they specifically cited our cultural competence and relationship-building capabilities as the deciding factors. Robert Sterling told me that several clients mentioned you by name as the reason they felt confident partnering with Meridian. This recognition was professionally gratifying, but also personally meaningful. The expertise that Tripp Peterson had dismissed as unnecessary was now being recognized as Meridian's primary competitive advantage in international market. The Tech Global Consulting contracts would establish Meridian as a major player in Middle Eastern telecommunications, with confirmed business worth nearly $2 billion, and additional opportunities emerging regularly. What had started as a devastating termination had transformed into the catalyst for extraordinary professional growth. Meanwhile, Peterson Global's situation continued to deteriorate. Marcus Thompson called with updates that were simultaneously shocking and predictable. The company's international division had been completely restructured, with Tripp Peterson relieved of his CEO responsibilities and demoted to head of domestic operations. The board finally acted, Marcus explained. So total losses from international markets reached $1.8 billion, and shareholders were demanding accountability. Tripp's father came out of retirement to oversee the transition to new leadership. James Peterson Jr., the company founder, had built Peterson Global through careful relationship building and respect for international business practices. His son's efficiency-focused approach had nearly destroyed everything the elder Peterson had spent decades creating. What's the new leadership plan? Complete overhaul of international operations. They've hired Linda Chen as the new CEO. She has extensive experience with global telecommunications and speaks 3 languages fluently. They're also hiring a team of international specialists and implementing comprehensive cultural training programs. The irony was stark. Peterson Global was now implementing exactly the policies that could have prevented their disasters in the first place. However, their reputation damage was so severe that rebuilding trust would require years of consistent performance and cultural sensitivity. Are they having any success with client retention? Some existing domestic clients are staying, but international prospects are extremely skeptical. Linda Chen is making personal visits to former clients to apologize for the company's previous approach, but most of them have already signed with competitors. This was the most devastating consequence of Tripp's decisions. Trust once lost required extraordinary effort to rebuild. Companies like Al Rashid Communications, Emirates Future Networks, and Advanced Communications Solutions had moved on to partners who had demonstrated cultural competence from the beginning. The telecommunications industry was also taking notice of the Peterson Global collapse as a case study in corporate mismanagement. Harvard Business School requested permission to develop a case study based on the company's international failures, focusing on the importance of cultural competence in global business strategy. Professor Rebecca Walsh from Harvard's International Business Department called me directly to discuss participating in the case study. Ms. Hassan, we're examining how American companies can succeed or fail in international markets based on their approach to cultural differences. Your experience represents both the consequences of cultural insensitivity and the benefits of cultural competence. I'd be happy to contribute to educational efforts that might prevent other companies from making similar mistakes. What we're seeing in your story is that cultural expertise isn't just about avoiding offense, it's about building the trust necessary for major business relationships. Companies that dismiss cultural competence as a soft skill are missing its fundamental business value. The case study would examine how Tripp's cost-cutting decision had triggered a cascade of failures that ultimately cost Peterson Global nearly $2 billion in lost business. It would also analyze how Meridian's investment in cultural competence had enabled rapid international expansion and billion-dollar partnerships. During the Harvard interview process, I was asked to quantify the business impact of cultural competence versus cultural insensitivity. The numbers were staggering. Peterson Global's cultural failures had cost them $1.8 billion, while Meridian's cultural investments had generated nearly $2 billion in new business. The return on investment for cultural competence is extraordinary when calculated properly, I explained to Professor Wall. Companies often view international specialists as overhead expenses, but they're actually revenue generators who enable access to markets that would otherwise be impossible to penetrate. The case study would be published the following year as Cultural Competence as Competitive Advantage. Lessons from the Peterson Global Collapse. It would become required reading in international business programs at universities worldwide. As Meridian's Middle Eastern operations expanded, I was promoted to Vice President of International Development, with responsibility for global expansion strategy. The company was now receiving inquiries from potential clients in Asia, Europe, and Latin America, all attracted by our reputation for cultural sensitivity and relationship-building expertise. The transformation was remarkable. 18 months after being fired for speaking Arabic, I was leading Meridian's global expansion efforts and managing billion-dollar international partnerships. The skills that Tripp Peterson had dismissed as unnecessary were now the foundation of my company's international success. 1 year after the Peterson Global collapse, I received an unexpected call from Linda Chen, their new CEO. Hassan, I want to acknowledge that Peterson Global's treatment of you was both professionally inappropriate and strategically catastrophic. The cultural expertise you brought to international business relationships was invaluable, and losing that expertise triggered consequences that we're still working to address. I appreciate the acknowledgement, Linda. The situation was difficult for everyone involved. I'm calling because Peterson Global is committed to rebuilding our international reputation through genuine cultural competence, rather than superficial changes. We're wondering if there might be opportunities for collaboration between our companies on projects where partnership would benefit clients. The conversation was professionally cordial, but the proposal was unrealistic. Meridian's clients had specifically chosen us over Peterson Global because of their negative experiences with Tripp's approach. Collaborating with Peterson Global would undermine the trust we had built with international partners. Linda, I appreciate the outreach, but our clients have made clear that they prefer working with companies that demonstrated cultural competence from the beginning rather than those that learned it through failure. I understand completely. The damage from the previous leadership's decisions will take years to repair, if it can be repaired at all. This admission captured the true cost of cultural insensitivity in international business. Trust was the most valuable currency in global commerce, and once lost, it was extremely difficult to rebuild. Peterson Global's reputation problems would persist long after their policy changes, while Meridian's consistent cultural competence continued opening new opportunities. The following month, I was invited to speak at the International Telecommunications Conference in Geneva, where I addressed an audience of business leaders from 60 countries about the importance of cultural competence in global partnership. The presentation drew standing ovations and generated numerous follow-up inquiries from companies seeking to develop their own international expertise. During the conference, I had an unexpected encounter with Tripp Peterson, who was attending as part of Peterson Global's efforts to rebuild their international reputation. The conversation was brief but illuminating. Layla, I owe you an apology. I made a serious error in judgment when I terminated your position. The consequences have been far more severe than I anticipated. I appreciate the acknowledgement, Tripp. I've learned that international business is much more complex than I realized. Cultural competence isn't just about language skills, It's about understanding entirely different approaches to relationship building and decision-making. The admission was significant because it demonstrated that Tripp had finally understood the fundamental misunderstanding that had led to his downfall. However, the acknowledgement came too late to prevent the damage to Peterson Global's international prospects. 2 years after my termination, Meridian Technologies was recognized as the fastest-growing international telecommunications company in North America. Our Middle Eastern operations alone generated over $500 million in annual revenue, while our global portfolio exceeded $1.5 billion in active contracts. The success story attracted attention from business publications worldwide. Fortune magazine featured Meridian on their cover with the headline, "Cultural Competence, the Ultimate Competitive Advantage." The article detailed how my experience at Peterson Global had informed Meridian's international strategy and enabled unprecedented growth in global market. The Peterson Global collapse had become a cautionary tale taught in business schools, while Meridian's cultural competence model was being studied as a best practice for international expansion. Companies throughout the United States were investing in cultural expertise rather than assuming that American business practices would translate directly to international market. Looking back on the extraordinary journey from termination to triumph, I realized that Tripp Peterson's decision to fire me had inadvertently created the perfect opportunity to demonstrate the true value of cultural competence. His short-sighted cost-cutting measure had freed me to join a company that understood the strategic importance of international expertise. The lesson for other professionals was clear: expertise dismissed by one company could become the foundation for extraordinary success elsewhere. Skills that seemed expendable to cost-focused managers were often the most valuable assets in competitive global markets. The lesson for companies was equally important. In an interconnected world economy, cultural competence wasn't optional. It was essential for sustainable international growth. Organizations that invested in cultural expertise would thrive, while those that dismissed it would find themselves excluded from the most lucrative global opportunity. Tripp Peterson's declaration that "we don't need Arabic" had cost his company nearly $2 billion and transformed their strongest competitor into the regional market leader. Sometimes the most expensive words ever spoken are the ones that seem like common sense to people who don't understand the complexity of the global market. The telecommunications industry would remember the Peterson Global collapse as a defining moment when cultural insensitivity met its inevitable consequence. Future business leaders would study this story as a reminder that in global commerce, respect for cultural differences wasn't just ethically correct, it was financially essential. And somewhere in Chicago, every time those elevator doors opened in the Peterson Global building, someone was probably thinking about the day they lost $2 billion by firing the one person who could have prevented the disaster. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.